Media literacy should be integrated with internationalism, solidarity with global activism. For me, as an advocacy journalist and as an activist at heart who uses media as a tool for social change, all of these things are interconnected and should be integrated with each other. So for me, I mean, I go to the source, I try to cover these social movements and figure out a way how we can link our struggles together and uplift each other's voices. And so it's empowering, it's beautiful, the collective consciousness that's exploding around the world, the social movements that are exploding around the world. I'm here for it. I want to cover it. I want to be the media voice for it. And I think that people who are earnest, who want to be involved, who also are passionate about media literacy, critical media literacy, can do that, can go and be the voice for their community, can pick up the tools right in their hand and go teach themselves how to edit, how to film. I mean, you have the device right here. Go be that person, go be that citizen journalist and cover those struggles in your community. We need you to do that. And, as stifling as an environment as it is, I think that this is something that's really beautiful and we can embrace it and we can use it to empower ourselves and empower our communities.
Critical media literacy is absolutely essential for a functioning society, as it really empowers people to make decisions for themselves and critically evaluate what they see, read, and hear. Socrates once said that an unexamined life is not worth living, and I think really an unexamined text is not worth reading either. Meaning that if you're not critically scrutinizing what you're actually ingesting in terms of your media diet, then you will just be swilling ideology and just completely awash in a sea of propaganda. People really need to be their own protagonists. They need to be in their driver's seat. They need to be well educated because ultimately an educated, informed populace is the centerpiece for any functioning democracy. And without it, I don't really think we can talk about countries being democracies if we have populations who are deliberately being silenced or kept out of the loop for any sorts of important issues. So critical media literacy really should, at its best, empower people to critically evaluate, scrutinize, and challenge what they hear from politicians, from bosses, or from any other sources of power. And it should help them organize and build towards a better world. And in that sense, it really is an emancipatory ideology, because without understanding the world as it really is, we're really all hamstrung and shackled. And that's really where critical media literacy can come in. The Armenian-American media scholar Ben Bagdikian once said that there's no greater force in shaping public understanding about what is true and what is false, what is real and what is fake, and what is possible and what is impossible for a society to do. And so therefore, it's absolutely crucial that we start really critically evaluating what we are ingesting. Now, it's okay, I think, if media reform or media literacy is not your number one issue as an activist, but as Mickey Huff says, it had better be your number two, because otherwise no one will ever hear what you've got to say. And so, in short, if we ever want to change society for the better, we need to really start by critically evaluating our media and by changing it.
Well, I feel like what we see in classrooms where college students do the validated independent news exercise is that students come to feel ownership, in a positive sense of that term, around a story or an issue. They know enough about it that they can go back into their communities and engage conversations, initiate and engage conversations about that topic. Therefore, having kind of at a grassroots level an agenda setting a capacity. And I think if we're going to talk about a revitalization of democracy in this country, that's one of the things that personally gives me hope, and one of the things I'm most proud of in terms of Project Censored's commitment to continuing to be a student-driven organization, right? The work we do, the mission we do is in many ways driven by students, and that sets us apart from other organizations that do critical media literacy or that serve an important watchdog function when it comes to news and news censorship. So yeah, I think that's an important thing, this idea that students become empowered through doing this work.
Well, one thing I think that's really important is for us to sort of understand what it really means to be independent. You know, there are a lot of people who are not necessarily part of formal media structures, and so they imagine themselves as independent. But, you know, I guess one question we have to ask is, how can we be independent from the dominant discourses that structure common sense, right? Because if you are sort of independent in the sense that, you know, you're making media with your own equipment, and you're maybe you're freelance, or you have a small media business, but at the same time you have bought in, you kind of drinking the Kool-Aid in terms of the rhetoric that power is. Are you actually independent? What is that kind of independence? Or are you functioning very much in line with the forces that are oppressing us and producing the things we don't want? So I think that that's an ongoing question, and it definitely plays into elections, right? Because we're going to see, you know, all kinds of, you know, framings of issues intensify and sharpen during elections. Who we think is responsible for things. So I think, but elections are a time when that political rhetoric gains steam, and you really need an independent media and critical literacy to navigate that. But then, once the election is over, you still need to now understand what's going on, right? There's a way where kind of the media cycle slows down afterwards, and maybe people aren't as concerned, but I think that's maybe in some ways when we need to pay attention even more.
I think critical media literacy is the fuel to push people to take prompt action. I mean, you know, when you think what takes someone to lock themselves to other people and block the Golden Gate Bridge and protesting of what's happening in Gaza, what prompts someone to stay up all night printing flyers in order to have a vigil the next day? What is it that gets people to come together in small study groups or a huge mass protest of hundreds of thousands of people? It's the knowledge that not only what is being done in a particular issue is wrong, but also the fact that it's being done in their name, and that there's really no other way that they can change the narrative other than to act. And I think that's the most important thing about critical media literacy, is it turns you into someone with agency. It shows you not only how you can understand the story and what's happening, but how you can understand your particular space and your particular role. And when you can do that, I think it's easier to make a decision to go out and to make change, to do civil disobedience, to march in the street, to hang a flag outside your house. I mean, whatever it may be that you're doing on a political issue that matters to you, I think being able to see how you fit into the specific space, how you are in this political stream and conversation, and if you do X or if you do Y, it can make a difference. But I think that's very hard to do unless you know how to deconstruct and understand the stories, so that you can see, okay, as I look out and look at all these various different things, this is where I am in this, and this is what I can do to change it.
So beyond elections, which is obviously at the forefront of our minds, critical media literacy can help us engage in any sort of social issue that you care about. So if you care about the environment, there's a pathway through learning the tenets of critical media literacy, to engaging with those topics, and then going out and forming communities and coalitions to do that work to advocate for social change. And it might even be using the media in a savvy way. The media is not necessarily the enemy. It is a tool that can be used for good or for bad. And it's up to those of us who are engaging in critical media literacy to help facilitate a way for everyone to think critically about the media and then engage in the issues that they care about, not just during an election cycle, but there are those that are beyond, whether it's women's rights, racial injustice, economic inequality and insecurity, LGBTQ rights. These are all climate change. There are a myriad of issues that we can start to make positive change if we are well versed in the issues, know how to use the media to our advantage, and promote that message and do the hard work of activism through critical media literacy.
We're not in the business at Project Censored of telling people what to think. We're in the business of trying to help people think more critically and independently on their own by exploring these things. And we've got a lot of programs that do that at our website that look at validated independent news, historical context from news that's often left out, right? That's really important for civic engagement. We live in the United States of amnesia, as Gore Vidal once said, the playwright. But it's also hard one step further. It's hard to live in a nation of amnesia or forget something that you may not have known about or were taught in the first place. And this gets to the connection to our educational system, which is why critical media literacy, I think, is very significant, because we just don't have enough civic literacy in our society either. And critical media literacy, I think, is really connected in many ways to civic literacy that impels more meaningful civic engagement. We have to start somewhere. And I think that critical media literacy really gives us sort of a route that leads out to so many other important things that we need to develop further in order to be a more robust and healthy democratic republic.
In general, it informs a person in myriad ways. Critical media literacy is a set of tools that is amenable to so many disciplines, and it teaches a person to not be cynical, but to be questioning in the best sense of the word, to do their own homework, to not, yes, look for expertise, but also be able to formulate educated decisions on their own.
With Israel's war raging on in Gaza, something really interesting has happened, which is people who have been consuming mainstream corporate media, they have been able to develop even stronger critical media literacy skills just by the mere fact that the media is blatantly lying about their goals in supporting Israel in its war in Gaza, because we have this really stark contrast with, our liberal politicians standing in front of the TV, giving us a really heartwarming statement with a really nice smile, and sometimes even with tears, talking about how much they care about civilian life. Meanwhile, they are actively giving Israel the very means and weapons to drop on the civilians in Gaza. And so this has allowed people to have a conscious awakening, because it's just so blatant. It's just so obvious that they are lying to us about their care for civilian human life. And so what this has done is really charge this anger inside of people. And so now we're seeing this mass mobilization and organizing of people across the world, in fact, not just here in the United States, but across Western so-called democracies, demanding that they end their support for Israel. And this has allowed for people who normally wouldn't even be mobilized or that political to get up and protest on the street, to get up and block ships from delivering weapons to Israel. Even people who work within those companies and shipping companies, they are the ones who are leading the way to stop those shipments from taking place. And we saw the very brave and yet horrific act of self-immolation by an active duty member, Aaron Bushnell, who used his privilege from within the US military and Air Force to draw attention to the US's support for Israel. And he woke a sleeping giant once again to take action. And that's why it's so important for people to have this critical media literacy, because we are able to recognize that the very people who purport to support human rights and democracy and freedom of speech and social justice are actually the ones who have exposed their moral depravity through this war. They have no intention of supporting free speech and democracy and human rights. What they represent are the interests of war profits. They represent the interests of blood and war and destruction and exploitation around the world. And so sometimes it does take something really horrific like the war in Gaza to take place for people to wake up, but that's what we're seeing right now.
The centers of power want to believe that that you owe them your vote instead of them going out and earning it. And a real huge part of that is trying to launder that that entitlement through corporate media, and putting on big shows just before the election, or promising these, pie in the sky policies, and then, at the last minute, yanking it out from under people, and or trying to, rebrand the Democratic Party as, some sort of like peace-loving, justice-seeking, party of the people, when its policies are just regular American, fascist police state policies, imperialist policies. We're also taught that electoral politics is the be-all, end-all of democracy. We should just kind of like shut up and go to brunch if a Democratic leader is elected. How could we, create mass movements that are against Democratic Party policies? Being able to be critical of that media propaganda campaign, and in turn, kind of like widening your scope, and looking at the broader context of why the Democratic Party, for example, is shifting to the right, what it has to do with late stage capitalism, what it has to do with the climate crisis and unending wars and occupations, and why we have 800 military bases around the world, and why we are co-authoring a genocide in Gaza. And there's no way that developing critical media, literacy in yourself, won't, completely kind of shatter the myths that you've been told, and develop you politically and principally. And that's one of the reasons why, of course, they don't want us to be literate in media critique, and why it's so important that we help each other become literate. If we can change the path that this wretched country is on, that's only going to come from people making these material connections between how this country operates, and the effects it has on us, and how different it could be.
So yeah, I mean, if anything, on the one hand, I would hope that a media system provides you enough information to actually make a reasoned decision when you're going into the voting booth. But that's the least of it. What I actually want is a media system that doesn't just give me that. It's a media system that actually is thinking about systems. And that's exactly the opposite kind of thing that corporate media does and has done for decades. The critique we have had of that, for decades continues to hold true. It is about, there's certain things that are favored in this coverage, but actual, coverage of movements and implications for systems, we've had to piece that all together ourselves on the outside with what resources we've been able to pull together, which is why independent media was always something we were seeking policies to subsidize, more and more outlets to utilize, and solidarity to build, right? So yeah, elections are one thing. Solidarity building, that's what I want, right?
But I think this kind of journalism is crucial for civic engagement beyond voting in elections. What we're seeing now is, Israel's indiscriminate bombing kills Palestinians by the thousands. People calling, emailing their representatives, demanding a ceasefire, protesting in large numbers in cities all over the country, engaging in powerful discourse. That to me shows that people are rejecting corporate media's usual approach, which is to completely deprive readers of context. People are looking elsewhere. They're reading about the historical context of this moment. They're following up independently and being, active media participants. And yeah, I hope that continues.
So it's so important for us to think more broadly beyond just voting as being the high point, the pinnacle of democratic engagement. And I think good journalism is an integral part of that broader process of democratizing society, seeing us not just as consumers, which is what corporate commercial media typically do. They just treat us as consumers, but really think of us again as engaged citizens. And good journalism will present social problems, not just describing them or telling us what one Democrat, what one Republican says about the problem, but really treating it as a problem for all of us, for society writ large, and also going into what we as engaged citizens should do about the problem, right? So really it's a form of solutions journalism, really focusing on not just the structural nature of the social problem, but what we as engaged members of democratic society can do about this problem. And ideally, that's what journalism would be doing. It would be really fostering this participatory democracy, and that's what we need to be working towards.